welcome to today's Peer Review Week Scholastica Water Cooler Chat. I'm Danielle Padula. I head up marketing and community development at Scholastica, and I'm so excited to be joined by James Butcher today, aka the Journalologist, for our event. We're calling this Water Cooler Chat the New Journal Editor. We'll be having an impromptu discussion about how the role of journal editors is transforming with technology, inspired by this year's Peer Review Week theme, Innovation and Technology in Peer Review. So we'll be sort of ruminating on the question of who is the new journal editor of the 21st century today, and sort of who are they becoming. And we'll be talking about steps editors can take to stay ahead of the curve in these fast changing times. I do want to quickly note that this is one of many fantastic events for Peer Review Week 2024. So be sure to visit the Peer Review Week website to see all of the other events and resources this year, many of which are available to watch on demand. I had the pleasure of being part of the Peer Review Week steering committee on behalf of Scholastica, and I have to say that everyone's been working so hard to make this year a success. There are many, exciting different angles and ideas on this topic of innovation and technology and peer review. So really be sure to check out the breadth of events out there. I'll be adding a link to the official Peer Review Week website to the description of this video. Okay. So to start off today's chat, I wanted to first thank you so much, James, for taking the time to be here. I'm sure many watching are familiar with James's work. To give a quick introduction, James is the founder of Journalology, where he offers coaching and consulting services to help editors and publishers succeed in the increasingly competitive environment based on his over 20 years of experience working in the industry, including at The Lancet and Nature. And it all started with the Journalology newsletter, a free roundup of the latest scholarly publishing news that James sends out once a week. I highly encourage you to subscribe if you haven't yet. And you can also find the link to Journalology in the description of this video. And James, you launched Journalology not too long ago in 2022, right?
Yeah, so just over 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's incredible how quickly it's grown. You already have like 5,000 subscribers, I think.
Not quite that. Not quite
Okay.
that. Nearly 4,500, something like that. But it's
Oh, well, I have nothing to sniff at. Okay.
yeah, well, yeah, I don't know. It's very difficult to know what the benchmark is, but yeah, no, I mean, I really appreciate the invitation to come and speak with you, and this is an interesting topic that a lot of us are thinking about. So I think we can have a fun conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to dive in. So yeah, I guess kind of starting to chew on this question of who is the new journal editor. This idea for this topic, of course, was inspired by the Peer Review Week theme. And I have to say also just going to different scholarly publishing conferences this year, I've been able to attend some for Scholastica. I know other colleagues going as well. Something that we've all been talking about is that it just seems like the job functions of journal editors keep multiplying. And we just keep hearing from editors that there's more, kind of tasks to fulfill and functions to think about than they've ever had before, many of them as volunteers. So I'm curious, kind of to start off with the big framing question, comparing the role of the editor today with, say, a decade ago, in what ways do you think it stayed the same, and how do you think it's sort of radically different?
I mean, I think in many ways the core element have been the same for, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, really. So one of the phrases that I use in the newsletter sometimes is filter, enhance, amplify. I think this is a simple way of explaining what journals and editors do. So editors filter the papers that are submitted to them for their readers. They make them better, they enhance them through the act of peer review and through editorial engagement, and then they amplify the message by publishing them in their journal, good SEO on the website, building a community, building a brand, all of those things. Now that's been going on for a long time. So I think those core elements are pretty much the same, and not much has changed since I became first started in my career as an editor in about 2000. But of course, lots of things have changed. So, as an example, I used to edit with a pencil. Well, we don't edit with a pencil anymore. We've made some progress. So there were some things back then. I think it's important to remember there were some things, 20 or 30 years ago that were hard for an editor. Finding peer reviewers, it's hard now. And that's certainly, one of the big challenges for editors. But it was also really hard 25 years ago. I mean, often editors didn't have, authors, academics didn't have their email address on PubMed or any kind of search engine. So often, what we used to do at the Lancet is photocopy or ask the authors to send in 3 print copies of a paper and distribute it. to referees, hoping that someone would send us back some comments. So, I think it's important to remember that although things are hard now, they're hard in different ways than they were. It was also hard a long time ago. I think one of the big changes is around reproducibility. So, a lot of the things that we're asking editors to do now around checks and balances and making sure the authors are doing what they're doing, and some of that can be done by, editorial support staff. Some of it needs, subject matter expertise. But, if you look, for example, at the Equator Network, which is a network of different kinds of reporting guidelines, there's over 600 on the website. Well, that from an editor's point of view is incredibly difficult to keep on top of and then, to implement. So, reproducibility, we all care about it. It's incredibly important. I'm not saying those guidelines aren't useful. Of course they are, but how in a practical sense do we implement them and use them? So I think reproducibility is one of the big changes. And the other big change, obviously, and particularly so in the last couple of years, is around bad actors, paper mills, image manipulation, outright fraud. We know that there's more of this going on. And it's, for an editor, this is something that can be, really bad news for the journal's reputation, for your reputation. The risks, it feels as though that the reputational risks are higher now because there's so much bad practice out there. And of course, everyone's trying to fit it in alongside everything else. But just coming back, finding peer review is undoubtedly one of the biggest problems that editors have. This is what you hear time and time again. And a lot of it is because we have so many more papers than we had 10 years ago, and often, written by authors who, from China, from India, from countries which are now writing research in a way that they didn't before, which is fantastic, but they're not necessarily doing huge amounts of peer review. So, trying to match people to papers is increasingly difficult. And then I think the other one last thing that's changed is just the level of competition. You Danielle mentioned it in the beginning. It's just competitive in a way that it wasn't. Not so long ago, you could have a big name editor-in-chief, big, well-respected key opinion leader, a society journal with a brand, and it would just fly and win. Now there is so much more competition. There's broad scope journals. There are journals that can publish a paper very quickly. It's competitive, and that means that editors, in many ways, and this makes a lot of them quite uncomfortable, I think, they need to be salespeople, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, you can't just leave it to the marketing team to bring papers in. Editors need to be the face of the journal. They need to attract papers. They can't be passive anymore. And that, I think, probably makes some editors feel slightly uncomfortable. But it's the truth, right? You, as an editor, you have to be a salesperson as well as being able to be a subject matter expert and select the right papers for publication. And with social media and what have you, that's increasingly important.
Yeah, for sure. I think from what you're saying, something I think about is just the amount of different new technology platforms to keep up with, because to your point, it's the same kind of core job function and the same kind of challenges as in the past. And the sort of amazing benefit of right now is that there are so many tools at your disposal, many of which are free, for those volunteer editors, like social media platforms, to be able to do your, own marketing, or if you have a marketing team, to kind of work in conjunction with them, or to find peer reviewers via different peer review finder tools, like all these different tools for the different functions. But of course, then it also means that you have to learn how to use different tools. And I do think too, it's interesting. I'm on the EASE conference planning committee this year. I'm having a lot of fun with that, and shout out to them because they're amazing. I'm learning so much. I've never been on a conference. I did peer review week committee a couple of years back, but I've never done like a live conference. So it's been a lot of fun to learn. But something that's interesting too is we were talking about kind of what would be useful AI related topics to cover, because of course this year, it's sort of been last year a bit too, I guess, but like the year of AI, it's like everything is about how AI is taking over and what does this mean? And it's this sort of big, hairy topic. And something we were talking about too is sort of like helping to get to like the foundations of the human component first, to then sort of guide the use of AI tools. Because I think a lot of discussions can get sort of very technical very quickly of like we have to learn all these different tools and we have to start implementing these different paper mill detectors and all these things. But it seems like some teams kind of are needing to get a foundational sort of framework or plan for how they approach research integrity with all that's changed to then inform the use of tools. I don't know. That's something that I've been thinking about. We talked about a bit, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on that. It's sort of balancing that human and technical. And I know at ALPS conference that just recently happened, you were on the session, The Role of Human Editors in an AI World. Sounds like a really interesting discussion. I know Brian Cody at Scholastica, our CEO, he was able to be there. I wish I was as well. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious from that discussion as well, what your sort of hot takes are on the ways that AI is altering, enhancing, or threatening peer review, and how editors should be thinking about it, in that human side in addition to the technical.
No, it was a really good session. Mainly because of the panelists were really excellent and they thought about it a lot, and it's helped me think through some of the issues in a way that I hadn't perhaps before. I mean, my understanding of it and reading, from what the panelists said and from what I've been reading, I think a lot of AI, and often when we say AI, what we really mean is some kind of algorithm. I mean, I'm not sure if it's always necessarily
Yeah.
AI in the strictest sense, is around QC checking. So papers that arrive, how can we check them in an efficient manner for yeah, I mean, some of it would be fraudulent practice, but also just to make sure that the title's right, the abstract's right, the all the things that are needed for a paper. And that's great. And we also, there's lots of organizations that are trying to do that. And there's lots of organizations that have built tools to match people to papers to find peer reviewers. And that's all, relatively straightforward. In fact, that's a really good thing because we're struggling with that, and we need to be able to build a more diverse reviewer pool. But I think where it gets interesting is in the immediate future and further down the line. And the thing that I think worries me a little bit, and I think we need to talk about more, is that first stage in the peer review process, which is, should we send the paper out to review?
Mm-hmm.
Because and I'm sure people are already doing this, although I'm not, aware of anyone specifically, but you could build AI tools, algorithms that look at a paper and could in some way make some kind of initial decision about how likely it is to succeed, i.e. be published.
Mm-hmm.
You could look at the reference list. Is it citing journals that, in the same field as the journal that the authors have submitted to? You look at the authors. You could look at the topic. Is it the sort of topic that the journal publishes? So you could use that kind of tool to find out of scope papers. But you could also probably put some kind of alpha, numeric value on how likely it is to publish or be published, which may be helpful, but it could also, just perpetuate the bias that we already have in the system. So you could imagine that you have a paper that has, two authors from Nigeria, and the algorithm says, well, that's, only 0.02% of papers in this journal had authors from Nigeria, and therefore we're going to reject it because we don't, it doesn't match the profile. Well, that's completely the wrong, that's the last thing we want. So I think we need to be really careful about this, because I'm sure it's going to happen if it isn't already happening. Is that initial screen, should we send it out for peer review or not? How can we create algorithms that help editors rather than it being, a yes/no binary decision made by the computer? Now, I'm sure, I'm sure people are always going to want that human input, but I think we need to be really careful about it. I think we need to be really, really careful about the perpetuating the bias and actually not creating any diversity at all, because what you're going to end up with is exactly what you've had before, because that's what an algorithm is trained on, what's happened previously. So yeah, I mean, I think that out to review piece for peer review is interesting. And then, further down the line is what I'm thinking of as more what feels like science fiction, but I'm just not close enough and savvy enough to know how powerful those algorithms are. But, people are writing editorials, thinking about how AI could be a peer reviewer itself, with the human, just going in and sanity checking the results that comes through. I'm sure it will happen at some point. It's just a question of, are we talking next year, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? but that kind of additional help, I mean, I could see, for example, around statistical peer review, that would be really helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think that's science fiction further down the line for peer review. I think again we need to be mindful of what the potential for bias for it to be manipulated. And then I think, from an editor's point of view, and we talked about this a little bit at the out session, is about what is it to be a scholar. And I might be being a little old-fashioned here, but to me, and I guess it's one of the reasons I write the newsletter every week, because to me, writing is thinking. That's what helps me to think through what's going on in our industry. And is writing a core part of scholarship? So, editors over the years have written a lot and thought a lot about authorship, contributorship, credit criteria. And I can completely understand the rationale for people whose first language may not be English or need some extra help, why large language models can be fantastic.
Mhm.
But to what does that mean about being a scholar, about the act of scholarship, if you're getting lots of support? And lots of people have different opinions, and I don't think to my mind, that is part of being a scholar, is writing. I know other people who have a very different opinion, and that's okay. It's just I don't think there's any right and wrong answers here. But I think we need to think through what does it mean to be an author, and how should that be declared on a paper? What does that mean for peer review? There are some, whether they're ethical questions, philosophical questions. I think there are some big things that we need to tackle. I think we've only just started. We think a lot about the technology, but we don't necessarily think about the implications of what that might bring.
Yeah, for sure. And I have to say, I mean, I work in marketing at Scholastica. I'm not technical, but from being involved in conversations with our development team, and actually, too, it's interesting. I just read an article recently in the Scholarly Kitchen by Letty Conrad. I'm not sure if you saw this one. There's always so many great articles coming out, but this was about inclusive R&D and product development. And I'm thinking about that right now because it is so true. And, she was talking about kind of different strategies. I think she gave kind of a 4 strategy framework of questions to ask in product development. And I think it could even apply to editors and kind of even authors, watching today, obviously not, developing a product, but just kind of thinking about how did tools serve me and how to, um, ensure that technology is being informed by the human side and thinking about those ethical considerations. And I know, for us, like our team has internally had lots of conversations about, different things that might be possible to implement and, what are the implications of that for, the ethics of the journal, for inclusivity, especially because to your point, it is true that algorithms and AI tools, a lot of it is based on, or not even a lot of it is, it's based on the inputs it's given. And I think what you said is so true that if it's given historical inputs of the way that things have always been done, you don't really have a whole lot of opportunity to change the way things have always been done, which can also
Yeah.
impact, of course, early career researchers as well. I know there's lots of concern among that community of like, how do we break into doing peer review and how do we learn and all of these things. So yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to think about there, but
I mean, I think so. When I was at the Lancet, one of my former colleagues, one of the things he often said to us was, a good editor provides readers with information that they didn't realize they were interested in. And
mhm,
that stuck with me for a long time because I think it's a really astute observation. It's very easy to be safe, right? You can give information that everyone knows about, but actually editors should be challenging. They should be pushing the status quo. They should be trying to move into different areas and spot new hot topics. So I think, that's one of the areas that AI will probably be, good at. What are the hot
mhm.
topics? And that might be helpful for editors in terms of, pushing into new areas. So I think it's trying to get that balance between being, considered, making sure that the quality controls there, but also using AI in a way that doesn't allows us to move outside of our comfort zone and into new areas of research. And I'm sure it's possible. We just need to be aware of it.
Yeah, and I'm curious for you and from the discussion with colleagues at Alps, are there any sort of good examples of concrete ways people are using AI right now that they feel comfortable with? Because I feel like we often talk about kind of the concerns or the threats. I'm curious, kind of like, how do you think AI is useful right now?
I mean, I think there's a lot of talk about it. But as I say, I think a lot of it, from my understanding, it may well be just there's things going on in the background that I'm not aware of, that a lot of it is around quality control, checking for paper mills, that kind
Mhm.
of thing. And of course, everyone feels very comfortable about that as long as there's some visibility into the black box. So I
Mhm.
think, one of the concerns that editors are going to have is you could, for example, imagine a submission tool that any paper that is seen to be a paper mill paper doesn't even get in front of the editors, right? I mean, the editors don't see it. Now, the editors may be quite happy, pleased that they're not being wasted their time about that, but there may be false positives. There could be a paper in there that could, from someone that's very important to the journal, that is stripped out, gets a desk reject. The editors don't even realize that it's been rejected, that could cause problems. So I think that sense of opening up and being clear of what has been done, I think that's a core part. Editors need to understand what the criteria are,
Mhm.
what's happened, because fundamentally they're the face of the journal. They're the ones who are ultimately responsible for the content. Um, so I think we're still in very early days from an editor perspective. And I think from authors, I think it's quite different in terms of, I think LLMs are being used a lot. I think for editors, probably less so. But editors often are quite conservative, and I think they'll want to understand what's going on, and not unreasonably, right?
Of course.
What's the black box? What's inside the black box?
Of course. Yeah. And I mean, thinking of an automation tool that people have been using for a long time. So I think it is interesting too that, in a sense, a lot of the talk of AI and machine learning feels very futuristic, but it's been going on for a long time as well, right? Like machine learning AI has been in development since I think going back to like the 60s or something. In scholarly publishing, we've had different tools up to this point that use those different types of technical frameworks already. Um, and I think one that's interesting with this discussion is authenticate or similarity check with Crossref. And I remember speaking with Fabienne Michaud, their head of product, or I'm misremembering her exact title, but she works within product at Crossref, and she's amazing. She had a wealth of information, but really something she said that I think about with any of these tools now is remember it's a tool. It's not like the final decision. And if you get
Exactly.
a similarity score that's very high, that doesn't mean that you just say, okay, our threshold is this, and we're going to, dismiss those papers. That is an indicator that a human now needs to look and evaluate. And I feel like that with everything you're saying, that sort of comes to mind for me as relevant and maybe a more kind of accessible example for people, because I think it's something a lot of people are already doing. So it's not, this future idea. But yeah, I'm kind of curious your thoughts on kind of current tools and how they might inform use of future tools.
Yeah, I mean, I think it boils down to trust, and it also boils down to time. And I think we just need to be realistic about, most journals are run by academics who are doing it on top of their teaching commitments, their research commitments, their clinical commitments. They've got a lot going on, and they've got to make quick decisions about papers. And actually, if they've got a tool that's saying, this is probably not going to hit the mark, I don't know how they will react. Maybe they will be very, cautious about it, and go through the report, or they may just say, okay, fine, I'll trust it and move on.
Mhm.
And maybe that's okay over time once you build the trust in the algorithm, that you're fairly confident that what it's telling you is going to be accurate. So I think it's gonna take some time. But I think the key thing is, and I just plea for anyone who's listening here, involved in technology at all, is editors and technology teams have to work together. I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen so many examples over the years where tech teams build cool stuff, but actually they haven't spoken to either the researchers who would use it, or the editors who have got deep understandings of workflows. You need to build things that are going to be useful and that are going to work, and that understand, or take into account all of the unwritten rules that go on. There's a way that things have been done for a long time. Some of those things, may well need to be dropped over time. But there's also that culture of how research publishing is done. And I don't think you can just ignore it. And people need to understand what that culture is. So tech teams and editorial teams have to be working really, really closely together.
Yeah, I think the entire Scholastica tech team would echo that. I have to say one thing, in thinking about product development, that I know we frequently will say is, what is the problem that needs to be solved? So it's not necessarily that a tool needs to be built to solve it the exact way that it's happening right now, but rather what does the user need? What is the user problem? Understand that and then figure out kind of what to build. And I think from going to conferences and speaking with other technology providers, including Clear Skies, the really amazing new paper mill alarm tool out there. Others working. I know I've talked a lot with Josh Nicholson over at Site as they've been developing over the years. And I think that really is just kind of something that resonates with all of the technology providers, is trying to understand the user need and really think about how to help them innovate, and in a way that editors and authors and reviewers will be comfortable with, because of course you're always asking people to learn new things and kind of evolve their process. So I think it definitely has to be a step-in-step relationship. And I echo, I think for editors, authors, reviewers, whatever tools you use, like don't be afraid to share your thoughts, ideas, or questions, because technology providers really are listening. They want to hear from you. And I think a benefit with technology today is that you can actually communicate with them, on a level where you're not having to, I don't know, maybe you sort of write a letter to somebody or something. Like now you can send an email or, a post on social media or whatever. So I think that's so true. And I do want to pivot really quickly, because I know we're getting kind of close to our time here, to a different topic, which you sort of started to touch on with this idea of editors having to also kind of be sales people of their journals and, kind of help promote their journals. A lot of what we hear about now is this idea of needing to build journal communities and cultivate, an engaged author community, especially with open access publishing models where the author might even be sort of this paying customer, if you will. So I'm curious, what aspects of the author experience do you think editors should be most concerned with improving? And how do you, think that editors can build more engaged author communities, and I mean, certainly also reviewer communities as well, both from your experience working as an editor and then also at Journalology now?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. This is one of my personal bugbears. I'm glad you asked this question. I mean,
Okay.
I think we need to not think about author communities. I think we need to think about researcher communities. And what I mean by that is researchers are readers as well as authors. So all authors read. Some readers also are authors. So it's a Venn diagram with some overlap there, but all authors are readers. And we focus intently on authors with their writing hat on, which is good, right? I mean, we want to be able to provide a good author experience, fast publication, treat people fairly, all of those, standard things that people have been aiming for years. But we really, really shouldn't forget that authors are also readers. And there's this intense focus about being an author, or with a researcher wearing their author hat. But we shouldn't forget about researchers when they wear their reader hat.
Mhm.
So, and I think actually, I mean, my prediction is going to come back and it's going to go full circle and become important again. And I think, the reason it was important for, the first half, 2/3 of my career, we thought about readers a lot, was because institutions were paying site license, paying for content and cost per download. So, how much usage, or the subscription revenue or the subscription price that the institution was paying divided by the amount of usage would be the cost per download. That was key. That's what the customer, the librarians, cared about more than anything, is, are they getting good value for money? Are people using the content that they've paid for? And then, of course, as we move to an APC model and the author takes over, that metric becomes less important. Although I think it will come back, because I think funders, understandably and quite rightly, are going to want to know, are we getting a good bang for our buck in terms of the APC? Who's engaging with the content? And not just in terms of usage or citations, but social impact, that kind of thing. There's lots of discussions around that. So, I mean, I think, yeah, that aspect of readers is really, really important. I mean, I think something else that I feel that editors really need to, and it is, not everyone agrees with this, so this is contentious. But since we're talking about peer review and it's peer review week, I think of peer reviewers as advisors rather than as referees, right? So to my mind, editors, the buck stops with the editor. So the editor takes responsibility. If they want to overrule the peer reviewer, that's absolutely fine. They need to stand by that decision and have really good reasons for it. So, that sense of taking responsibility. I mean, I'd love in many ways to see editors being named on every paper that's published. The editor-in-chief, I guess, ultimately is, but as a team, who's taking responsibility for the paper. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a key part of a journal building a community that trusts the journal, right? I mean, fundamentally, authors submit to journals where they trust the journal, they trust the author, the editors, they trust the policies that are in place, and you have to earn trust, right? You don't just demand it; you have to earn it. And I think that happens over many, many, many years. And the EIC, the editor-in-chief, needs to be more than a figurehead, right? I mean, they need to have a vision. I mean, this is something that I talk about a lot at various events and things that I attend and speak at. Editors need to have a vision. What's the editorial vision for the journal? I mean, some journals are repositories and database journals, and that's fine. And there's a good reason for some of the sound science journals to act like that. But a really good journal has some vision, and that comes down to an editor, and it's about leading a community, or at least helping a community to move in a direction that the community wants to, but not in a passive way, in a active way. So I think, editors are such an important part of building communities. And I think author experience is important, but it's not absolutely everything. I think there's so much more to it than author experience. And I think we need to go back to what it was like, or at least remember what it was like 10 years ago, and not just entirely focus on the authors.
For sure. I think I love that idea of the Venn diagram because it's true. There's so much overlap in the different, like author is the reader and vice versa, and kind of thinking about those different experiences. And I think that's so true. Just the idea of the journal having a vision, and that does start with the leadership for sure. Um, well, I feel like we could keep talking about this for so long, but I want to be cognizant of time here. So to wrap it up with kind of a quick to give a quick hot take question, I'm curious, with all of these new tasks and functions that we're talking about, what are your thoughts on advice for kind of keeping up with the fast pace of change? I know that's a hard question, but if you were to kind of give editors your quick nugget of advice, what would you say?
I think honestly, I think most editors are just struggling to keep their head above water, and I think they are. Do they need to have up-to-minute breaking sense of what's happening in the news? Probably not. I think that unless they're working full time for a publisher. I mean, I think we need to have, and communities need to have a think about what they stand for and how technology can help, and how they want technology to help. What are the and for the editors to have that conversation with their publishers around the help that they ideally want. So it's that discussion between the editors and the publishers and the tech teams and the commercial side of things. What help do they need and the support they need? And we should be listening, right? The publishers should be listening to that and trying to help them and solve those problems, as you said earlier. I mean, that's the key bit. I think we need to think about some of the philosophical issues. It's similar, perhaps. I mean, yeah, perhaps to some like GM food that we had all those years ago, where we need to think about the implications of it as we're doing the research. And I kind of feel there are some things that we are going to hit us at some point around scientific publishing in its broadest sense. It doesn't even have to involve journals, right? I mean, how do we publish content? How do we do it fairly? How do we do it equitably? How can we make sure that we get that diversity of opinion? But how can we also do it in a sustainable, financially sustainable way? There's some big discussions there that we need to have, but not spend too long discussing it. We need to make some progress as well.
Yeah, discussion and
There's a lot
action
there.
for sure.
Yeah, exactly. We like action as well.
Well, that's also true. And I think definitely it's true for those tuning in, especially Peer Review Week as an opportunity. This is a great time to see all of the different publishers getting involved, individual journals, scholars, vendors, this whatever big mix of different groups and organizations coming together. And it's really a chance, I think, to kind of bridge the gaps and talk to each other. So I encourage people to not only kind of tune into these events, but also engage, and social media, like that's the place to do it. So definitely check out all of the Peer Review Week accounts and the conversations happening there. So with that, I wanted to say thank you so much again, James, for taking the time for this water cooler chat. Thank you to everybody tuning in. Again, if you haven't already, definitely check out that Peer Review Week website. The link's in the description, and definitely check out Journalology. That link is in the description as well. And we hope you have a wonderful day and rest of Peer Review Week. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Danielle. It's been great.